Hello, friends. Welcome back to Peace and Plenty in 20. As you can tell, I am not in my usual office or my usual recording space, but rather I am outside on the front porch on a glorious Sunday. And I wanted to do this episode from a spot that just brought me a lot of peace and comfort because we're going to be tackling what I consider to be potentially triggering, very vulnerable, very kind of difficult conversation to have for many women, but especially for me. But I feel called to do it. So we're going to be talking all about body, self-image, weight, food, all that noise that so many of you I know can relate to and that many of us have struggled with for years and decades and just as long as we can remember being alive, quite frankly. It's such a huge topic, and I think the best way to really go about talking about my own experiences and sharing what I want to share with you is to do it in kind of a chronological way because that's just makes the most sense to me. Anytime we're looking at things that we're struggling with, it's always so important to go back. Where did this start? How did this start? When did this start? So that's kind of the journey I'm going to be taking you on with me. I know if you're a follower of me, I know you've heard me talk about health and talk about weight and talk about intuitive eating. And you might kind of be wondering, where are you now in that journey? Because I did for a while was very, as I was getting certified as an intuitive eating counselor, which I am, I talked about it much more, I think, in my content. And you've probably noticed a shift. And that's not that I don't still believe in intuitive eating, because I do, and I believe intuition is the number one thing that we have to fall back on in our lives, in every area of our lives. But I finally felt like it's time for me to kind of share my whole experience with the journey and the decades of my relationship with my body, with food, with the scale, and ultimately with myself. And this month, August, kind of feels like a great time to do that because what we've been talking about, which is moving from this idea of seeking permission and giving yourself the freedom to embrace intentional living and embrace peace over, perfection. But more than that, I'm really sharing this because I know, again, so many of you that I talk to fight these same battles I've fought. And I think it's important for us to talk about it. I think it's important to be open about it. And I also think it's very interesting that my good girl syndrome really relates a lot to this concept, because that deep-rooted belief that we have that we need to be perfect and look perfect, and that our worth is tied to how our bodies look and how we look in pictures and how we look when we get dressed up. And a good girl syndrome shows up very destructively in how we treat ourselves and treat our bodies and talk about our bodies. So let's dive in, starting at the very beginning. And I challenge you to do this if you haven't done this yourself. And I did a lot of this work again when I was going through my certification for intuitive eating, going back, and when was the first time that I remember being aware of my body, or being aware of what foods I shouldn't be eating? And I remember in 5th grade, this is the first memory I have, is 5th grade. I had a Hello Kitty journal, and it was like a diary, but I remember I flipped to the very back page because I I don't know, I didn't want anyone to see it. And I remember I started writing down my weight. So I stepped on the scale at some point, and I remember writing down my weight. And I don't remember exactly as a fifth grader what I was doing to try to change my weight. I just obviously knew it was something that I should be paying attention to. And I just remember the number and thinking about, I guess, what other girls had said they weighed. And I think that was the start of that kind of like looking left to right and comparing. And I also remember dressed in my cheerleading outfit, riding to the church. Our church had, CYO basketball, and I was a cheerleader, and sitting next to my friend and like looking at the size of her leg, her thigh, and looking at the size of mine. And hers was like really thin. So I remember that. I remember then, so that was fifth grade. I'm going to say like sixth, seventh, eighth grade. I do remember doing those Jane Fonda workout tapes. I literally can still recite some of the lines. I actually still have one or two exercise moves that I use from it. But if you guys remember the video, I think it was pink and purple striped leg warmers she was wearing. Anyway, so I had those VHS tapes, and I used to do those. And, that's where the whole like, all right, I'm going to exercise and be good this week. But then I would, go out to dinner with my family or have pizza with friends. And then it was like, oh, all right, I'd rather just do that. Like, so right then and there, I kind of started that all or nothing. Like, oh, I should either be like working out like Jane Fonda and want to look like that and have that body, or I could eat food. So right there and then, I would say I started that whole concept of it's like either or, right? And I do remember also here it was like 8th grade, 9th grade was when I started hearing comments like the boys would make, like, who had a good ass, or, talking about girls' bodies. And so then I was very impressionable, obviously. And so then it was like, oh, okay, so for guys to like me, I have to have a good ass. I have to have a good body, right? And that just intensified even more in high school. And not just because of my own stuff, which I had plenty of going on. I also wound up dating someone who was very into bodies, weightlifting and whatnot. And, I looked to him to help me, but it definitely did more damage than good. Why don't you eat this, not eat that, go run? Thinking back now, it was very, very destructive, and it definitely contributed to my disordered eating pattern. I'm not going to say I never had an eating disorder. I definitely have had disordered eating patterns, which a lot of us do. And it's not our fault. Just want to throw that in there because we've been fed so much diet BS. I also remember in high school in gym class, not only did they measure you and take your weight, they had that little machine that I was trying to hold up my microphone. So that would pinch your fat on your arm, and they would write down how much fat you had on your arm. And I remember my number was like high, and I was like kind of trying to laugh it off, but definitely felt shitty about myself. And I remember my gym teacher, Mrs. Quantmeyer, she actually was trying to make me feel better. She's like, well, some people have, I don't remember what the explanation was. Some people, their muscle is more attached to the fat, or I don't know, something that a 17-year-old was like, oh, okay, that must be it, trying to make myself feel better, or she was trying to make me feel better. But again, these are just all of my experiences. I am sure, and I know from talking to many friends, that everyone has had experiences that kind of stick with them in terms of people's comments about bodies, even well-intentioned doctors, parents, relatives, commenting on our bodies or our food choices or how we eat. I mean, that noise is so loud. And even to this day, it's very loud. Just conversations about what you're eating and how you're eating and what you should be doing. It is so loud. It's just becomes so overwhelming. And so then what happens, or what happened for me, is like, all right, so it's that either all or nothing. I'm either on a diet, because that's the only way I knew how to. I didn't have any real sound, nutritional guidance. And it was the 90s, and that was like Snackwells, and remember all the fat-free stuff. And there was just so much information. And on top of that, again, all of this noise, insecurity within myself, and then having that like reaffirmed by boyfriends, I don't know, doctors. That external validation, like looking for that, like to be a certain size, to be a certain number, like that was just the way I sought peace and happiness. When I'm this size, or when I lose this much weight, or when I hit this weight, that's when everything's going to go well. As we know, that's just not true. That's just not the case. And to be so wrapped up in the only focus being shrinking, getting smaller, the number, trying to, feel confident and fit in and please your boyfriend, or try to get a boyfriend, or whatever it is, that just creates such a shame cycle. And not only is there that shame, right? Not only is there that embarrassment of, publicly being weighed and measured. What happens then from that shame is it almost reinforces what I feel like I need to do to not feel embarrassed or not feel shame. Well, because the next time I get weighed, I want that number to be low. And how do we do that? We restrict our food. I restrict my calories. I stop, eating. I eat things fat-free. In college, girls around me struggled with this too. I had a dear friend in college who came back, I remember, after one summer, and it was clear she had a very severe eating disorder. And it was upsetting, but it was also very confusing. Like when we would go out to eat, like everybody's kind of like looking at each other's plates, and like just the stress. And when I think back on it, so many of us have just been so imprinted with those thoughts. And I think these thoughts of this is what you eat if you're good, and this is what you eat if you're bad, really kind of become our own rules. And not just our own rules, it's kind of like sort of accepted among your friends, right? And among society. And I mean, think about, I don't know if you've had this experience, but I know among many of my friends, it's like, oh, I was so good today, I was so bad today, based on what we put in our mouths, like based on what food we ate. And then it just, everything becomes so enmeshed, right? Like weight versus being healthy versus, wanting to drop weight for spring break, and then moving into, my 20s, looking a certain way, my wedding dress. So it like follows you throughout your life. And over the next few weeks, I'm going to dive into that with you, like more specifically how that journey went for me and how I started to undo all of these decades. But what I can tell you today, here in this first episode, is that to start the healing, and we haven't even touched on the actual food or the diets and the specifics of that, because I think the overall picture here, the real driving force is this idea of I have to trust what society is telling me, not myself. I have to trust, and I learned to believe certain things about bodies and eating and weight that I have to start to undo, that I have to start to heal. And so I think the first big picture is to to start to attempt that healing process is going back and looking at that younger version of myself and talking to her and telling her, your body was never a problem. And to be honest, it wasn't. And I would not have had decades of yo-yo dieting and my weight going up and down if I had really kind of just moved my body, really thought about like nutrition from a nutrition standpoint and what different foods do to you. But again, that education wasn't necessarily readily available to us. So I want to go back and tell her, this was not your fault. This is what the world was teaching you, that, you know, it is good to shrink yourself. It is good to control yourself and not have an appetite and restrict and be thin, because that's the standard, right? That's what we should all be aiming for. And that relates to the good girl syndrome. It does. We learn very early on that love and acceptance are conditional based on how we perform, how we look. It's easy to look back now, and it's easy when I'm 50 to have this knowledge, but I think it's so important, and I have these conversations with my girls all the time. It doesn't mean we're going to be able to, quote unquote, fix it, especially nowadays with social media. It just has made it, I think, even worse. On top of me looking back and talking to that younger version of myself, I want to talk to young women too. I talk to my girls. I don't want them to go through their lives struggling and beating themselves up and damaging their bodies and feeling shame and not feeling confident. So I think it's very important that we think about the way we speak to ourselves. I think it's important that the conversations that we have, even with other women, I had a conversation with one of my good friends this weekend about, you know, just commenting on people's bodies in general. Through our teens and 20s, there was a lot of commentary on each other's bodies and, oh my gosh, you look so good. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to look good. I want to look good. I still do. But not from a place of I'm doing it because this is what I need to do to be worthy. This is what I need to do to fit in. I want it to come from a place of like, that's just something I want for myself. I think what I'd like you to do this week for your action is go back and think about, like, where were your earliest memories of just having an awareness around either your body or food or your diet, and what were the messages you received, and how did that impact your life then, and how has it throughout your life manifested itself? Has it helped you or has it harmed you? And I want you to really kind of just take some time, take a few minutes and just journal about what your experience has been like. And that's just the first step. Again, I'm going to be talking about this for the next few episodes. That's kind of my theme for August. And I want you to come along on this journey with me because I think it's so important that this is something we talk about and that we try to heal and that we just try to do better. That younger version of you, that little girl who first learned her body needed to be better or her weight needed to be less, she deserves better. And so do you. So be gentle with yourself as you start to like do some of this work and start to think back on it. And for some of you, it might be more profound than others. If you have that noise, like if it's something that has been an issue for you throughout your life, I think it's important for you to take the time and sit and journal about it and just be honest and think back on your diet decades like me and what you thought, what you felt, what you went through. And then we're going to dive in, in the next few episodes to kind of undo some of that thinking and realize that a lot of those are just feelings, not facts, right? Okay, so thank you for indulging me. It's it's such a huge topic that sometimes like I'm struggling to find the words, and I also want to be careful about my words because I do know it can be a very triggering topic for some. But I think it's so important to talk about and be honest about and open about, and you know that that's what I want to do, is always be transparent here in the hopes of helping someone else, right? Of guiding you guys maybe to something better, something different. Come back next week. Don't forget, if you have not subscribed yet to my YouTube channel, please do that, because that way you will get an alert whenever I put up a new episode, or sometimes, if there's a special episode. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, share it with a friend who you think might need to hear this. Download it, like it, leave me a review. All that stuff just helps spread my message and helps spread peace and plenty in 20. I am your host, Janine Deramo, transformational coach for midlife women. I don't think I said that at the beginning, so I'm going to sign off with it. And definitely come back next week, because I'm going to take you into my 20s and 30s. The years and years of Weight Watchers cycles. I mean, I can't tell you how many books I had. And up until, not that long ago, I've been a lifetime member of Weight Watchers for decades. And we're going to dive into that and see how that story has evolved up until now. Until then, be kind to yourself. Get out there. Enjoy what's left of your day whenever you're watching this. And just remember to live with peace and plenty. I'll see you guys next time.